What is up? I have another tutorial for you today. We are going to be diving into Metashape, and we're going to be going all the way through the process of creating our photogrammetry, from the photographs all the way to the final render in Octane. I'm going to be switching up my format now. I'm going to be working on a series of 10-minute tutorials, and the point of this is to make a more concise learning process for all of you. So, with that in mind, I'm going to try and keep these videos to 10 minutes, and I'm going to create them ahead of time, and then I'm going to talk over the videos so that I can explain in detail what is happening and what I am doing in my video. So if you're interested in any individual step along the way, you can fast forward to that point and just start there, but I'm going to start from the beginning and go all the way to the end. The first thing that we're going to be getting into is working in Metashape. I'm going to be taking my photographs that I took earlier, and I'm going to create the 3D geometry in Metashape. We're then going to bring that into Cinema 4D. In Cinema 4D, I'm going to clean up the model, and I'm going to do some extra post work to the geometry. The third thing we're going to look at is we're going to bring our textures into Photoshop. We're going to do a little bit of post-editing on them, and I'm going to create a specular map so we can get some of those nice reflections and highlights in our final render. Finally, I'm going to go back into Cinema, and we're going to apply our new textures to a Octane material. I'm going to set up a lighting studio, and we're going to get some really nice renders that look photorealistic. So join me as I go through the whole process from start to beginning, and we're going to dive into what photogrammetry is and how powerful it really can be. Alright, and we're here in Agisoft Metashape. The first thing I'm going to do is create a new project. With the new project, under the chunk, we can add photos. Go into the add photos and select all of those photos that you took. To select them, just go through them all and hold shift to grab all of them and open those up. Once those photos are in your scene, they'll be under the chunk, and we're going to go back into that workflow tab, and now we're going to align the photos. So hit align photos. You can choose the accuracy. It will change the amount of time it takes. I usually go with high and leave everything else default. Once that's all aligned, you'll have all of your thumbnails in the scene, as you can see right here. And we have a sparse cloud that is generated. Now, what we want to do here is we want to select all of those excess points. So we're going to reconstruct uncertainty and select a level somewhere in the middle. This will select all of our points that are not totally certain, and we can just hit delete on those, get rid of those points. Now back in the workflow tab, we're going to build our dense cloud. So hit the build dense cloud button, and we can choose the level that we want to do that at. The higher you choose, the longer it will take again. Now hit OK on all of that, and it will generate our dense cloud. To view the dense cloud, we actually are going to hide our thumbnails in that tab, and we're going to go into the dense cloud view. Now you can see we have a lot of excess geometry, a lot of excess points here that we don't want in our final model. So I'm going to go into the freeform selection tool, and I'm going to select all of those points outside of our subject and just delete all of that stuff. Get rid of it so we're not wasting space. Now that we have just our subject, we're going to go build mesh under the workflow tab. For here, I'm just going to go 3D. I'm going to choose the dense cloud, and I'm going to go with high value. The advanced tab, we will keep everything default and continue with the process. All right, now that our geometry is built, we're going to go into the View Geometry tab up top, and we can actually look at it as a solid or a wireframe or shaded. You can see how much detail we're actually getting in this model with that wireframe view. Let's go back to the shaded though. Now we're going to go into the workflow tab, and let's finish up by building our textures. For this, I'm going to leave it as generic mapping mode, and the blending mode I'm also going to leave as default. You can choose the size of your texture. We're going to leave it at 4K and hit OK. Now we'll be able to view that texture being applied in the textured view panel. And as you can see, we have this texture going on. We have some weird things going on that we're going to want to actually fix later in Cinema. So we're going to do that. Now let's export our model. We're going to go into the Export Model tab under File. And here, name your object whatever it is that you're making. So I'm going to name mine Snake Plant since that's what I'm doing. I'm going to save it, and I want to make sure that I export my texture as a JPEG. Everything else should remain the same. You can choose the level of precision and hit OK. Alright, now we're in Cinema, and let's bring that model in here. So I'm going to import it, and I want to choose the scale. I'm going to switch it to inches to sort of scale up my object to make sure it's an accurate scale to the world. Hit OK, and your model should load in. Now it's going to look a little weird because we have this transparency being applied to it by default. We're going to fix that real quick by going into the transparency tab and getting rid of that in our material. Now we can see that we are not lined up very well with our model. So I'm going to align to center and center to parent. So now we have our object centering in the middle of our scene. I'm going to select all of those polygons and sort of rotate it around to flatten out my model. Alright, we want to get rid of all this table geometry. We're not going to use that in our final render, so I'm just going to select around the snake plant and sort of select those polygons and delete those out. Make sure that it's all nice and clean. I also will be getting rid of some of this geometry that I don't like. I don't want that thing there because it's just really messy, so we're going to clean that up a little bit. Now let's rename our model to whatever your object is. I'm going to name mine Snake Plant. And under the sculpting tab, we're going to go in there and we're going to subdivide our object. Now we can actually sculpt away some of this messy geometry that we have. So I'm just going to go in here. I'm going to be smoothing all of this out. Wherever I have some holes, I'm going to inflate the geometry to fill those holes up. And we're just going to go all the way around the pot here, doing some smoothing. I end up using the pinch tool to sort of sharpen up some of those edges along the pot. And with something like this, we really want to make sure that our geometry just looks nice and clean before we start trying to render. That's looking pretty good now. I'm going to go into the leaves a little bit in a little bit here and start sharpening up those edges on the plant by using that smooth and pinch and flatten tool. Alright, now that that's looking pretty good here, I'm going to go back into my standard layout and I'm going to current state my sculpted object so that we can sort of mess with it. And let's just name this as version 2 and hide the old sculpted version. Now we're here in Photoshop, and in Photoshop we want to do some work to our textures. So for the texture, I'm going to add a new adjustment layer, and we're going to add a levels layer. I can kind of mess around with the levels here, and let's just sort of get it to a more clean look, kind of get the colors that we're looking for. I'm actually going to use a white rectangle here as a reference to what true white should look like. Now that I have the colors where I'm looking for, I'm going to start selecting around different parts of my texture that I want to have different reflective and roughness values. So first I'm going to select these beads that are in the actual pot, because I want those to be very reflective. I'm going to create a new solid color layer, and this will just help me remember that that's one level of reflection that we're going to be looking for. Next, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm using the rectangle, or the freeform selection tool, and this time I'm going to start selecting that sort of glaze on my pot. I'm going to want this to be a more reflective value than some of my other pot areas, so let's create a new fill layer for that. For the plant, I'm going to use the color range selection tool, and I'm going to select somewhere on my plant and change that fuzziness to choose how much of the plant I actually want selected. Let's create a new solid color layer for this, and as you can see, we have all of those plant areas selected. I'm going to put this at the bottom of my layers here. And finally, I want to get that terracotta, so I'm going to select around that. And once those are all selected, we'll create a layer that goes underneath and rename all of our layers. Finally, I'm going to create a base layer, and this will sort of be the base reflective layer, filling in any of those gaps that we missed with our selections. And once we have all of those selection values, now we can start to go back in. We have our layers here. We can start to go back in and choose the reflective value and the roughness value that we're looking for. The closer to white our value is, the more reflective it's going to be. So for my base, I'm going to choose a darker color, and as I go up here, I'm going to choose lighter colors for the more reflective areas. Now we have our specular map. So I'm going to go and export that, and we're going to bring that into Cinema here. So in Cinema, I'm building a base for my model. I'm going to create a new material, and this material is going to be an Octane material since that's what I'm going to be rendering in. Let's apply that to the snake plant. And now I'm going to delete my old materials that I had. And I'm going to go into that Octane material, and let's go into the glossiness and the node editor, and let's start working on this. Now I'm going to bring an image texture in here, and I'm going to link that with my diffuse. With this, I'm going to choose my texture that I created, and let's add that in there, and that will be our base color for our material. Now we want to make sure that it's transforming and projecting correctly, so we're going to create nodes for those. And let's create another image texture here, and this one is actually going to apply to both the specular and the roughness. So let's grab that specular we created in Photoshop and apply it to both the roughness and the specular values. Again, we want to make sure it's transforming and projecting correctly, so I'm going to link those up to our projection and transform nodes. Now I'm going to use a multiply node here, and I'm going to actually bring my image texture into the multiply node and add a gradient that's also going to be multiplying. With this, we can now control the level of roughness and specular with a gradient slider, bringing in those values a little bit and choosing the exact amount we want this to reflect. Let's link those up and come back into our standard view. Now under Octane view, we can actually create another material, and this we're going to use for the base. So I'm going to create that material, and this will be a very simple material. I'm going to make it a glossy material. Let's make it a full black value. And under the roughness, I'm going to bring the roughness up just a little bit so we get sort of these rough shadows that'll look really nice. As you can see right here, I've hit the render button. I'm going to add an HDRI to get some lighting in my scene. And under the HDRI, you can select your HDRI texture. I have one that I've already pre-made here. It's a studio lighting HDRI. So I'm going to sort of mess around with my lightings now, and I'm bringing a couple Octane lightings in there. I'm looking for sort of a fill light on one side of my model, and I want this rim light that's going to give nice highlights on the other side. So we're just going to sort of mess around with that. I'm going to rotate my HDRI around to get it exactly where I'm looking for. And I'm going for this sort of moody looking render here, something that will just look really nice, and that will kind of hide some of those imperfections. Finally, I'm going to create a color correction node back in my material, and let's bring that diffuse into there and link it all up. And for this, I just want to sort of bump that saturation up to get a more saturated looking plant here. And as you can see, we have our final model and the final render in Octane. We went all the way from just using photographs to creating a 3D render that we can animate and we can do whatever we want with. And it's that simple. That's all you have to do. You just have to go through these simple steps to create a really nice photorealistic model. So thank you guys so much for watching this tutorial, and I really hope that it was helpful for you. You can check out my videos. I'm posting videos every single week. I'm going to be posting some more 10-minute tutorials for you guys to watch and to sort of learn some new things. So subscribe to my channel if you're not already subscribed, and have a good week, guys.